Some ideas in science don't resolve, they fold, reverse, and collide with themselves in ways that challenge even the most experienced researchers. Time that behaves like a loop, particles that appear in multiple states at once, principles that refuse to line up with our logic. On Sleepy Traveler, we explore these paradoxes that keep scientists questioning their own assumptions. If this kind of curious exploration resonates with you, like and subscribe to help others discover the journey as well. Now, let's step into the puzzles that continue to reshape how we think about the universe. A physicist once suggested that paradox is the strange lamp that brings truth into view. It flickers in the corners of our understanding, where certainty begins to thin out. Sometimes, a question is not there to be solved or put away. It is there to gently unsettle you, to loosen the floorboards beneath what you are sure of, to tug at the edges of what you call reality. These are not party tricks or puzzles built out of clever wording. They are the bare collisions between human logic and a universe that does not always agree to be tidy. Over the years, these quiet collisions have refused to disappear. Brilliant minds have turned them over like smooth stones, looking for cracks, and yet the stones remain. What you are drifting into now is not a simple list of oddities to collect and forget. It is more like walking through a dim gallery of tension points in science, the places where our best ideas begin to fray. Here, time can seem to fold in on itself, tracing loops that close without ever quite opening. Here, whole civilizations should glow in every direction, yet the sky stays blank and still. In this landscape, even the act of watching is not innocent. There are moments when simply observing a thing seems to change what that thing is, as though the universe flinched under your gaze. You will hear of a cat that is somehow both alive and gone in the same breath, of tiny billiard balls rolling along a table only to collide with their own past selves, of black holes that may be quietly swallowing not just matter, but the story of whatever happened to it. Each of these ideas begins in a gentle, reasonable place, with rules that feel familiar. Yet when you follow those rules all the way to their edge, something tears a little, and through that rip, you glimpse how strange the world beneath our comfort might be. If you are someone who can sit with that rip without rushing to stitch it closed, someone who finds a strange kind of beauty in not having every answer labeled and shelved, then this is a good night to be here. There is a tenderness in simply admitting that the universe does not bend itself to our need for neat endings. It is layered, restless, occasionally impossible. Like a book whose pages are out of order, it still managed to tell a story. And sometimes the most honest thing we can do is to lean back, let the questions remain questions, and listen to what they stir in us. Out in the dark, space looks serene, a soft black canvas, scattered with quiet pinpoints of light, as if nothing complicated could ever live there. But folded inside that calm is a question that is anything but peaceful. We live inside a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, most of them older than our own gentle sun. Astronomers have learned that many of those stars cradle planets, and a surprising number of those worlds might wear conditions not so different from Earth, warm enough for oceans to stay liquid, stable enough for life to take hold, old enough for something thoughtful to have opened its eyes and looked back at the sky. So where is everyone? For a long time now, we have been listening as carefully as we know how. Vast radio dishes have turned their cold metal faces upward, sweeping the sky again and again, hoping to catch the faintest whisper, a patterned hum, any small sign that somewhere far away, someone is talking. What has come back to us is not a chorus, but silence, deep, patient silence, like calling across a canyon and hearing only your own voice coming back. Thin and delayed, it feels less like there is nobody on the other side, and more like something about the way we imagine this conversation might be wrong. By all the cautious numbers, we are not supposed to be alone. Even with modest guesses, intelligent life should have had many chances to appear. In many corners of this galaxy, there ought to be hundreds, perhaps thousands, of minds capable of building machines, transmitting signals, leaving unmistakable fingerprints on the cosmos. And yet, there is no single confirmed message, no undeniable artifact glinting in the dark. Only stars, only distance, only the soft crackle of natural noise. This contradiction does have a formal name in the textbooks, but you do not need the name to feel it. It is the kind of thought that arrives uninvited when you look out of a late-night window and grasp, for a moment, how much sky there really is above the rooflines. It loosens the old belief that life naturally grows more complex, that intelligence naturally reaches for tools, that tools naturally reach for communication. Perhaps civilizations bloom and wither too quickly, rising like brief sparks that fade before anyone far away can notice. Perhaps they learn how to split atoms and reshape worlds, but not how to live with that power without turning it against themselves. Perhaps they do endure, but choose to stay quiet, watching from the dark the way you might watch a flickering candle from the end of a hallway. And then there is the heaviest possibility of all, the one that sits at the bottom of the mind and does not move. Maybe we really are the first. That single thought takes the familiar story of humanity and changes its weight. Suddenly, we are not just one more voice in a crowded hall. We are something fragile, something rare, holding a conversation that may not be happening anywhere else. In that light, we are not only searching for others, we are also carrying something that does not yet exist beyond this little planet, a chance for the universe to know itself through us, a chance to speak where perhaps no one has spoken before. That thought carries a quiet responsibility, a sense that we should not flicker out before we have at least tried to send a clear, gentle signal into the dark. If imagining that makes the stars feel a little colder, or the silence between them feel a little heavier on your chest, you are not the only one who feels it. For a long stretch of our history, it was easy to believe that Earth was a special exception, the only known place with the right recipe for life, a small, blue drop of water and rock circling a modest star, singular and alone. That picture has cracked. With the help of modern telescopes, and wide, patient surveys of the sky. Astronomers have discovered that our galaxy is overflowing with worlds. There are hundreds of billions of planets turning out there, maybe more, each following its own slow path around its sun. Among those worlds, planets that resemble Earth are not a rare accident. They seem to be common. Data gathered over years by space telescopes like the Kepler mission have painted a new portrait across the Milky Way. There may be more than 300 million rocky planets circling stars roughly similar to our own, resting in that gentle band of distance we call the habitable zone, where liquid water can persist, not just one or two, but hundreds of millions of possible homes. You can picture them if you like, worlds with wide, glinting oceans and continents washed by rain, worlds with soft sunlight and long, slow seasons, worlds that have had time, long arcs of time, for chemistry to tangle itself into something that can copy, adapt, remember. Even if only a tiny fraction of those planets ever grew anything like biology, and only a smaller fraction still ever reached for awareness, there should be traces. We ought to catch the occasional glimpse of communication, a stray pulse of artificial radio waves, the dim outline of a structure circling a distant star, some subtle sign that someone else once walked there, built there, wandered there. Yet the sky, for all its brightness, stays quiet. This is not a poetic quiet, not the comfortable hush of a familiar room. It is a sharp contradiction, a kind of arithmetic that refuses to sit still. Space is not only vast, it is ancient. Many of the stars we see are billions of years older than the sun that warms our oceans. That is more than enough time for life to arise, invent tools, build civilizations, and slowly extend itself from one world to the next, stepping outward across the galaxy like stones across a river. If such a journey ever began, even once in even one place in this galaxy, it is hard not to wonder why we see no echo of it, why no great structures dim the light of their parent stars, why no clear signal has washed over our antennas with the unmistakable rhythm of a mind behind it. The feeling is a little like walking into a vast cathedral and realizing, with a small shock, that you are the only one breathing. The air ought to carry murmurs, footsteps, the rustle of robes and pages. Instead, it is bare, and the more you learn about how crowded the universe ought to be with worlds, the more this emptiness begins to feel strangely deliberate. There are many stories we tell ourselves to soften that feeling. Maybe intelligence tends to burn out quickly, like a candle left in a draft. Maybe it survives but learns to hide, wrapping itself in quiet so completely that no one else can see it. Maybe it is scattered so thinly across the stars that the chances of two civilizations overlapping in time and recognizing one another are vanishingly small. Each idea offers a little comfort, but each carries its own puzzle, its own loose thread. Every attempt to answer the question seems to unfold into new questions. Why does it seem as though we have arrived late to a gathering that never quite began? How can there be so many worlds that could sing, and yet so little song? If you find that imagining hundreds of millions of Earth-like planets with no answering voice makes your own life feel more delicate or more precious. You are touching the heart of the paradox. It is the quiet awareness that we are only just beginning to count the mysteries that refuse to fit inside what we know, and that the list is still growing, softly, in the dark. Even as we stand here, listening, the more carefully we listen to those quiet mysteries, the more another thought slips in at the edges. If there are so many chances for life, so many worlds with the right warmth and chemistry, why does ours feel like the only one under any kind of gaze, not just watched by us, but aware of itself at all? It is as if the stage is huge, the lighting is perfect, the props are all in place, and yet only one actor has stepped out into the glow. Some problems do not come from not knowing enough. They come from taking what we do know and following it so honestly that we end up with our forehead against a wall. That is what happened in the early 1960s. When an astronomer sat down and tried to turn this unease into something you could write on a chalkboard, he did not expect to solve anything. The idea was gentler than that. Just gather the questions in one line, like beads on a string, so we could see how they touched. How many new stars are born in our galaxy each year? How many of those stars grow up surrounded by planets? Among those planets, how many fall into a range where liquid water, and thus life, as we understand it, could be comfortable? Out of that subset, how many worlds actually kindle life? Out of those, how many creatures ever climb all the way to intelligence? Out of those minds, how many learn to build technology that can shout or whisper across interstellar space? And of all the civilizations that do reach that point, for how long do they survive with their lights still on? He lined up these questions in a single, simple equation. You could assign a careful guess to each one, then let them all lean on each other. At the end, you would have a number, a rough estimate of how many alien civilizations should be broadcasting right now in our own galaxy. The details of the symbols are less important than the feeling of the result, because here is the part that never quite sits comfortably. When you fill in those blanks with reasonable, even cautious values, the final answer almost never comes out to zero. This quiet line of reasoning, the one we now call the Drake equation, whispers that we ought to be surrounded. If its picture is even roughly right, radio waves should be raining down on us from many directions, carrying patterns, pulses, repeating structures that nature does not make by accident. The sky should be alive with artificial echoes, a soft static filled with meaning. Instead, the headphones hold only the gentle hiss of natural noise. Silence again. So we circle back and run our fingertips over the equation, feeling for the place where the logic might have slipped. Maybe we were too generous about how easily life begins. Maybe we were too hopeful about how often intelligence emerges. Maybe technology is the real rarity, the narrowest gate of all. Or maybe the most fragile number is the last one, the lifespan of a civilization. Perhaps that is where everything quietly collapses. How long can anything like us last before we exhaust ourselves, or our home, or our patience with one another? From there, the mind tends to drift toward two broad pictures, two ways of explaining the silence. One is frightening. The other sits even more deeply in the bones. The first picture imagines the galaxy not as an empty hall, but as a place crowded with eyes. Civilizations old and young, bright and complex, scattered like lanterns across the spiral arms, each one listening, each one careful, each one waiting and deeply reluctant to be seen, not out of simple paranoia, but because they have learned something through bitter experience, something we have not yet discovered. In this vision, the universe becomes a dark forest. Every species is a hunter of one kind or another. Every world is both a campfire and a hiding place, to send out a message, to ignite a bright, obvious signal, is to reveal your position in a woods where you have no idea who else is moving between the trees. When the risk is that unknown, the safest strategy is to remain quiet, to speak only in whispers, too soft to carry far. And whenever a voice rises above that hush, it does not stay for long. That would make our instrument's failure understandable. The others may be there, tuned to our frequencies, watching the flicker of our cities at night, weighing our choices in patient silence. They may be wondering whether we are wise enough to stay small and quiet, or reckless enough to break the long unspoken rule and shout into the dark. It is a bleak thought, but it matches a simple list of facts. No clear signals, no contact, only an enormous field of stars, each one apparently mute. Then there is the other picture, the one that feels like a hand pressing directly on the heart. Perhaps there is nothing out there at all, not because it is hiding, not because it is dangerous, just because there is no one. In this story, the galaxy is not a forest filled with cautious hunters. It is a vast, empty ocean, stretched farther than the mind can hold. The silence is not deliberate. It is simply the silence of no voices. In that ocean, our world is a small, fragile boat. We may be the first beings who ever learned to build such a craft, or the only ones who ever will. The water is cold, the horizon endless, and there are no other lanterns bobbing in the dark. Both of these pictures make sense of the quiet. Both are unsettling in different ways. If the galaxy is full of hidden watchers, then we are under observation, perhaps being tested without knowing it. If it is empty, then all the watching is ours to do. In that emptiness, we become the lone witness, the single hesitant narrator of everything we can see. A species that, if it fails, leaves no one behind to remember that the universe was ever briefly aware of itself from this particular angle. So we keep our antennas turned outward, listening with the patience of centuries packed into years. And we wonder which kind of galaxy we have been placed in, a forest of concealed dangers, or a sea so wide and thin that voices almost never meet. Somewhere between those images, a chill sometimes rises quietly along the spine, not the jump of sudden fear, but the slower realization that our place here is much more fragile than we were raised to believe. For a long stretch of our history, we thought we were at the center of everything. Then we learned that Earth circles the sun, that the sun is just one star among uncountable multitudes, that our galaxy is only one island among many trillions, each with its own storms and tides. Strange, then, that even after being moved from the center so many times, we still found it hard to let go of the idea that we must have company. Yet the longer we listen and fail to hear, the more that instinct is being reshaped. It is not only that we have not found intelligent life elsewhere, it is that with every passing decade, we uncover new reasons why it should exist. More habitable planets, more timescales long enough for evolution, more tools for detection, more chances for someone, somewhere, to step forward. And still the universe offers no clear whisper in return. Not a murmur, not a sigh, just an absolute, overwhelming mute. There is a peculiar emotion that grows in that kind of quiet. It is not pure fear, though it can make the chest tighten. It is not simple wonder, though the night sky can still take the breath. It is something like cosmic loneliness, a sense that the vastness above our heads is starkly real, and yet no other mind may be sharing it with us. The stars remain endless and indifferent, but perhaps no other pair of eyes is watching them quite this way. Silence, though, does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means fragility. If life is rare, we may be holding something that cannot be replaced if it is dropped. If intelligence tends not to last, then we may be a fleeting spark in a huge darkness, one that appeared by a delicate chain of accidents and could vanish just as easily. And if we are truly among the first, then we are more than mere onlookers. We become the experiment itself, the first attempt of this small corner of the cosmos to become conscious of itself. That would mean we do not just have the luxury of asking where everyone else is. We also have to ask what kind of story we want to become in their absence, what traces we want to leave carved into stone, encoded in light, hidden in artifacts for any future travelers to find, travelers who might arrive eons from now, stepping into our ruins, reading our signals, or discovering nothing and having to infer that we were once here. Perhaps that is why the silence feels so heavy when you let it sink in. It does not only stretch outward, it reflects inward with no alien voices to answer to. We are left listening mostly to ourselves. What we hear is a mixture of warning and opportunity, of danger and hope, and behind it all, a quiet sense of responsibility. If we are the only conscious eyes currently open to this patch of cosmos, then what we choose to see and do matters in a way that is both humbling and strangely awakening. In that way, the emptiness becomes a kind of mirror. We ask where the others are, and the universe offers us back only our own reflection, fragile, noisy, unfinished. The quiet between the stars becomes a canvas for our fears and our aspirations, a backdrop against which awe and dread live side by side. And just when the mind begins to settle into that picture of a lonely, listening species, another fracture appears in something even more intimate than space, because underneath all of this waiting and wondering lies a deeper assumption, one we rarely examine. Time itself feels like the most stable thing we know. It seems to tick forward, never backward. Seconds fall away, days arrive and end. A cause leads to an effect, A stone is thrown, and then the ripples spread. Yet buried under this steady rhythm is a strange possibility, like a hairline crack in glass. A tiny flaw you can only see when the light hits just right. The unsettling thought that time may not only flow, it may, in some hidden sense, bend back toward itself and circle. That faint crack in our picture of time is where the next problem begins to open. Imagine a loop, not a metaphor this time, not poetic language, but a literal loop in time itself. You take something from a moment that has not happened yet, carry it gently back into an earlier moment, and place it there. That something then grows up to become the reason it exists in the first place. The circle closes. There is no first step, no true beginning, only an unbroken ring with no clear starting point. A story that somehow keeps telling itself, with no author on the first page, beneath all the strange details. This is the root of one of the most unsettling contradictions in physics. It does not only poke at what we think is possible, it leans in much closer to whisper questions about what it means for anything to exist at all. To feel it, you can hold on to a simple, almost cozy image. Picture yourself wandering into a small bookshop on a rainy evening. You drift between shelves until a worn copy of Hamlet catches your eye. You buy it, carry it home, read it, and somewhere along the way your life takes a path that leads you to build a time machine. One day, with a mix of curiosity and mischief, you set the dials and travel back to London in Shakespeare's time. The air thick with smoke and the streets alive with chatter. You find him, hand him the book you once bought, and watch him leaf through the pages. He reads the play, feels something spark, copies it out in his own hand, and puts his name on it. It is published, performed, praised. Generations pass. Centuries later, that very same text, passed from printing press to printing press, lands in the bookshop where you first found it. You walk in, pick it up, and the loop quietly snaps shut. Who wrote Hamlet? The book did not appear from nowhere. It exists in every moment of that circle. But if you trace its ancestry backward, you never find the first mind that created it. It did not come from nowhere, but it did not come from anywhere either. It is an orphan that somehow has parents in every direction and yet none at all. This kind of loop has a technical name, but the name does not make it feel any less slippery. At its heart is a cycle in which cause and effect exchange roles. The cause is the effect, and the effect is the cause. A piece of information or an object moves through time, and its existence is perfectly accounted for within the loop. Yet nowhere in that loop did it ever need to be created. It persists only because the loop does not break. At first, this sounds like the sort of clever puzzle a writer might invent for a late-night story. But the part that makes physicists restless is that our best theory of gravity does not completely forbid such things. Einstein's equations of general relativity describe how matter and energy curve space and time, how that curved fabric tells matter how to move. Hidden among the many possible shapes of that fabric are paths called closed time-like curves. routes through space-time that bend around and meet themselves again, like a ribbon whose ends have been joined in certain extreme conditions. Those equations allow solutions where you could, in principle, follow such a path, travel into your own past, and carry something with you, an object, a notebook, a memory. It is not just odd, it is quietly destabilizing. If time can loop like that, if such curves are truly possible, then originality begins to blur. Ideas might not begin. Inventions might not have a first spark. Even your own existence starts to look less like a line and more like a circle. You can imagine reality in that case not as a straight road stretching from the past through the present into the future, but as a spiral staircase lit by dim lamps. You keep climbing, feeling the steps beneath your feet, believing you are moving into new space. Yet, every so often you pass the same window again, the same view, but at a slightly different angle. This time, perhaps, you are the one holding the book to feel just how deep the problem runs. You can return to the bookstore loop and let it play out slowly. You hand the manuscript of Hamlet to Shakespeare. He studies it, learns its rhythms, its characters, its tragedies. He copies it and releases it under his own name. The play becomes a masterpiece, taught in classrooms, performed in theaters, whispered in quiet rehearsals, printed over and over again, eventually, far in the future. One particular copy ends up on the shelf of the bookshop you will one day walk into. You, years later, wander in without suspecting any of this. You see the book, feel drawn to it, buy it, and eventually carry it back through time. The circle closes with a soft click. At no point did anyone actually write the play. There was no late night at a wooden desk where the story first poured from a mind onto a blank page. There was no first quill scratching the opening line. The words exist because they are caught in a loop that sustains them, like a melody trapped in a music box that has no maker, playing the same tune forever. This is the heart of the paradox. Not just an object without a true origin, but information that sustains itself without ever being created. We build our everyday sense of the world on a simple assumption: everything has a source. Thoughts come from minds. Machines come from inventors. Paintings come from artists. A song, however mysterious, comes from someone who first hummed it. In a temporal loop like this, the source fades out of the picture, and yet the thing remains solid and real. The story is here. The book is here. The performance is real. But when you ask who first thought it, the question dissolves. It makes you wonder what else, in principle, could exist this way. A scientific theory, perhaps a technological design, a piece of knowledge that appears in one mind, is carried back and placed into an earlier mind, and then passed forward again, unchanged, a perfect circle, like a song with no composer playing endlessly on repeat. The unsettling part is that physics does not simply wave this away. General relativity does not automatically forbid time loops. In fact, certain exact solutions to Einstein's equations, especially those involving intense rotation, extreme gravity, or hypothetical shortcuts called wormholes, seem to allow scenarios in which the past and the future are not as cleanly separated as we like to think. The river of time, instead of flowing only one way, twists and curls back into itself in those strange geometries. Self-created objects and self-initiated events are not obviously impossible. A cause can feed into its own effect, and the effect can wrap around to become the cause, until the distinction between them becomes a single continuous ribbon. Even the idea of a timeline starts to blur. Instead of a long, tidy filament stretching across the universe, you get a knot, and once that door is open, a darker thought steps through, quiet but insistent. What if we ourselves, or some piece of our civilization, sit inside such a loop without knowing it? What if a crucial idea, or a key technology, or even a central belief about the universe did not truly originate in any one era or mind? What if it was passed to us, directly or indirectly, by a future that already knew what we would create, and that future learned it from us? In a universe where time can circle like this, invention begins to resemble memory. Discovery becomes recollection. History starts to feel like rehearsal for a play that is being performed over and over, each run feeding the next. The sense of progress, of moving boldly into the unknown, quietly shifts into the feeling that we might be tracing over lines that have already been drawn, following a path we ourselves laid down in another turn of the spiral. If you let that idea sink in, you may find yourself wondering where your own thoughts come from, how much of what crosses your mind feels like a first, and how much feels oddly familiar, like something remembered from a dream. The paradox does not claim that this is how things are. It simply shows that if time can fold and bend the way our best theories sometimes suggest, then there is room in the architecture of reality for loops where things exist only because they never did not. To see the shape more clearly, it can help to change the picture. Think of time as a long sheet of paper laid out on a table, flat and clean. You can draw a line across it from left to right, calling one side the past, the middle the present, and the far side the future. Everything feels smooth and sensible. Causes are to the left, effects to the right. You can trace your life as a neat path along the page. Now imagine taking that sheet of paper and gently folding it. At first it bends only slightly. Then two parts of the line that were far apart along the table suddenly touch in the fold. Points that were supposed to be separated by years or centuries are now neighbors, pressed together. In that crease, yesterday and tomorrow can brush against one another. This is something like what happens in a closed time loop. An object does not simply move along the line of time. It steps out of the flat surface, rides the fold, and returns to an earlier point, bringing with it information that does not belong to that era. The timeline is no longer a straight, obedient path. It is warped. The beginning and the end are close enough to trade secrets. It sounds abstract, like a thought exercise in a quiet classroom. But this is very close to what certain mathematical solutions to Einstein's equations suggest. Near a rotating black hole, where space-time is dragged around like water swirling near a drain, the structure of time and space becomes complex and twisted under the right conditions. The paths you can travel along in time may circle back to where they started. The same is true in some ideas involving wormholes, those hypothetical tunnels that might connect distant regions of the universe. In these extreme scenarios, time is not required to march steadily forward. It can circle, loop, and even fold like thin origami paper under invisible hands. When you accept that even as a distant possibility, some of the strangest ideas about self-existing stories, originless objects, and events looping back into themselves begin to feel less like pure fantasy and more like shadows cast by the equations. In the folded world they describe, the straight arrow of time is only one simple shape among many. Once you let it twist, the universe starts to allow behaviors that had no place on the flat page. And in that twisted, folded fabric, a few of the strangest puzzles in physics do not disappear, but they begin, in their own eerie way, to make a different kind of sense. Earlier, we imagined a book traveling in circles through time. You can do the same with something more tangible, something you can almost hear. Picture a violin resting in your hands, warm from the touch, its wood holding the memory of every note it has ever played. You place that violin into a time machine and send it gently backward. Somewhere in the past, a composer finds it. To them, it is a treasure that should not exist yet, a shape and sound ahead of its era. They learn its voice, write music for it, and that music captures hearts. The violin is cherished, repaired, protected, passed down through careful hands and quiet rooms until, far in the future, it ends up in a shop where you discover it for the very first time. You buy it, step into your time machine, and send it back again. In that loop, there is no first craftsman shaping the wood, no workshop, no initial spark of design. The instrument has always been there and never been made. Its origin is the loop itself, a line bent perfectly back onto its own beginning. From the outside, the events fit together neatly. No one contradicts their own history. The timeline does not fracture, as long as each step is consistent with the others. The circle can go on forever, repeating without needing an explanation beyond its own shape. But beneath that elegance lies something quietly disorienting. If time can fold like this, what is a memory? What is an invention? Where, exactly, do we draw the line between discovering something and being handed it by a future that has already walked further down the road? The thought stretches beyond fiction. It reaches into your everyday life and whispers that something you love, or an idea you hold dear, or a tool you use, might not be as original as it feels. Perhaps you are just one crease in the folded paper, one point where the path doubles back, and the idea is simply passing through you on its way around the loop. When you see the world that way, progress begins to look different. Maybe we are not building ideas out of nothing. Maybe we are receiving them, like letters whose sender and recipient are strangely the same. Our role shifts from inventor to courier, carrying thoughts from one moment in time to another, making sure the chain remains unbroken. And if time truly can crease and overlap, it is natural to wonder how many folds we are already standing on without the faintest awareness. How many of our thoughts might be echoes returning from futures we have not yet lived? There is another way to feel into this, one that has less to do with books and violins and more to do with sound. Some systems do not break because they are starved of information. They fracture because they are given too much of their own reflection. If you have ever stood too close to a speaker while holding a microphone, you have heard that sharp, rising screech. The microphone picks up a sound. The speaker amplifies it. The microphone hears the amplified sound and sends it back again, and the loop tightens until all you hear is a howl. A feedback loop. The system is not adding anything new. It is simply folding its own output back into its input until it cannot hold itself together. Now, imagine reality doing something similar, but with events instead of sound. In certain ways of thinking about time, you can have feedback loops where the effect becomes its own cause. The future does not simply wait for the past. It reaches back, feeds into it, and together they knit the present into existence. It is not a story written from beginning to end, but a circuit drawing itself closed. You can picture a physicist at a desk, surrounded by scribbled papers and chalk dust, struggling with an unsolved problem. One day she receives, somehow, the final polished form of a beautiful equation from her future self. She studies it, understands it, publishes it, and the equation changes the world. Years later, when she has grown older and that discovery has settled into the foundations of her field, she becomes the one who sends the equation back to her younger self. The knowledge is real, powerful, and useful, but if you trace its path, it leads around and around in a perfect circle. Where did it truly come from? The loop feeds itself. There are no direct contradictions, no glaring impossibilities, just a calm, self-contained paradox. What makes this more than a nighttime story is that some of this looping logic is being taken seriously in the strange, delicate world of quantum mechanics. A few researchers think that information in our universe may not always flow in a simple straight line from past to future. Instead, the past, present, and future might become entangled, their roles blurred. In some models and experiments, the behavior of a system seems to depend not only on how it is prepared, but also on what will be done with it later, as if future measurements help decide which histories are allowed. There is an idea in this area, often called post-selection. Instead of saying that every possible path is taken and then we merely see one outcome, it suggests that only certain combinations of events are permitted, those that fit together perfectly without tearing the fabric of logic. The universe, in this picture, does not let paradoxes explode. It quietly discards any paths where things do not line up. Only self-consistent histories continue. The rest simply never become real. If that is even partly true, then reality might be doing something like editing itself in every moment. You are not only moving forward through time, you're also part of a web of checks and balances that constantly tests whether your choices, your memories, even your passing thoughts can sit comfortably inside a coherent whole. If a particular chain of events cannot be woven into a seamless loop, that version of events never quite forms, and that version of you never fully exists. What emerges from this is a picture of time far stranger than a straight arrow. It begins to resemble a feedback-driven cosmos, always echoing, always checking, always curving back on its own structure. There is no single, sharp beginning, no final cause standing alone at the start of everything. There is instead an ongoing pattern that sustains itself, like a tapestry kept in tension by threads pulling from every side. We usually think of the past as the firm foundation under our feet, the solid ground upon which the present is built. It came first, set the conditions, and what we are living now is simply the unfolding consequence. But what if that is not the whole story? What if the past is not only the beginning, but also, in some subtle way, the outcome? That unsettling thought is not just daydreaming. It slips naturally out of some interpretations of quantum theory and certain ways of modeling space-time. In these views, the present is not shaped only by what has already happened. It is also constrained by what the future must become in order for the whole structure to make sense. Consider a single quantum particle, a tiny system that could exist in many different states. Before you look at it, its description is fuzzy, spread out across possibilities. But in some carefully designed experiments, the outcome you finally see seems to depend not only on how you set things up at the start, but also on choices you make later, after the particle has already evolved. It is as if the particle were waiting not just to be observed, but to find out what kind of future situation it would end up in, and then quietly adjusting its history so that everything matches. The influence in the mathematics does not care much about the direction of the clock. The conditions in the future help determine which past paths were ever allowed. The story is selected as a whole. Some physicists go further and wonder if this kind of consistency requirement might extend beyond laboratory particles to larger, messier systems, including us. In that case, our bodies, our decisions, even our memories could be part of a larger loop of constraints. The past you remember would be one of many possible pasts, the one that best fits the present you inhabit and the future that needs to exist. Time becomes less like a river running smoothly downhill and more like a web, with the present as a knot held in place by strands tugging from both directions. Pull too hard on one side, and vibrations ripple through the whole structure. The future does not simply grow out of the past. It reaches back and helps mold the path that led to it. You can sense why this makes people uneasy. It nudges us toward a world where free will, memory, and identity are not as simple as they felt on quiet afternoons. Your past might not have been fully fixed until the future called it into focus. You become less a traveler on a fixed road and more a point of balance in a structure that is still settling. In such a universe, Time might not be marching toward a particular destination. It could be relaxing into a shape where every part agrees with every other part, like a net finding its final resting form in water. Cause and effect soften into something more like pattern. The past is real not just because it happened, but because the future needed it to be that way for the whole tapestry to hold. When you let that perspective sit with you, it naturally turns your thoughts inward. If your history is, even in the smallest way, chosen to fit the future that will be, then the question of who you are right now becomes more delicate. You are not only the result of what has been done to you and what you have chosen, you are also part of a larger agreement the universe is making with itself. A point where threads from both directions meet and tie together, and somehow, knowing that can make you glance back over your own timeline with different eyes, as if the story you remember living might be only one of many that could have been, the one that fit just well enough for you to be here, in this moment, wondering about it. When you start to see time as a web held from both directions, something quiet and unsettling slips in. Perhaps the strangest part of time is not where it is going, but how it decides what has already been. The past feels like solid ground, but maybe it is more like a pattern that has been chosen, the only one that allows everything else to stand. In that light, what we call memory begins to look different too. It may not be just a recording of what happened long ago. It may also be the gentle echo of what the future could not do without, rippling backwards so the story will fit into that soft uncertainty. People often place a harsher thought experiment, one that cuts much closer to the bone. You imagine, step by slow step, that you have finally done it. You have built a time machine. You stand before it, metal and light, humming quietly, and you decide that you will not use it merely to watch history. You will touch it, change it, test the rules themselves. You enter the machine, feel the door close, and choose a date long before your own birth. You are not aiming for the court of a king or the lair of a tyrant. You are going somewhere far more ordinary and far more dangerous, into the life of your own grandfather. Back when your existence is only a distant possibility wrapped in his choices. You are not driven by hatred. You are not seeking revenge. You are simply holding a question so sharp that only an impossible act seems capable of answering it. Because if you succeed in harming him before he has children, then the line that leads to your parent is cut. If that line is cut, you are never born. And if you are never born, there is no one to grow up, to build a time machine, to step inside, to travel back, to stand in front of this man with your heart pounding. If you never travel, then he lives. If he lives, your parent is born. You exist. You grow up. You build a machine. You step inside. You go back. And there you are again, with the same choice in your hand. This is more than a neat circle. It is a contradiction wrapped tightly into the fabric of the story, an action that erases the very possibility of itself, a wound that heals and opens in the same breath. The thought has become known as the grandfather paradox, but that name is gentler than the thing it carries. It is not just a curious story. It is one of the most serious challenges to the idea that time travel to the past could ever be real in a straightforward way. Because if the past can be changed in ways that unravel the present, then the timeline is not a sturdy rope. It is a fragile thread, prone to glitches, self-erasure, and logical collapse. Physics, as a language of consistency, is deeply uncomfortable with that. So, from this discomfort, several possibilities begin to gather. One is simple and cold. Time travel to the past may be impossible, not because it violates some poetic notion of destiny, but because it would create an unstable system, like a program trapped in an endless loop of crashing and restarting. Reality would never be able to settle on a version of events that did not contradict itself. The universe, in that picture, simply refuses to load scenarios that would make its own history impossible. Another possibility is subtler, almost sly. Perhaps time protects itself. In some theories, any attempt to create such a paradox is quietly absorbed by the world bending around it. You step out of the machine. You approach your grandfather, and then something small but decisive slips into place. The gun jams. The knife slips from your hand. A stranger turns the corner at exactly the wrong moment. You hesitate at the sight of his face and cannot go through with it. Perhaps you never even meet him at all, running into a friend instead and losing the thread of your plan. It is not that the universe has feelings, or that it is watching and judging you. It is simply that only self-consistent stories are allowed to exist. You can move within the past, but every choice you make is already woven into the history that led you there. You are not changing what happened. You are fulfilling it from another angle. Then there is the possibility that feels like someone gently but firmly pulling the rug out from under your feet. In this view, the moment you interfere, you do not rewrite your own past at all. Instead, reality branches. You do not destroy the timeline you came from. You step off it. A new world unfurls from the point of your action, carrying forward the consequences of what you did. In that branch, your grandfather dies young. Your parent is never born. And you become a strange visitor from a history that no longer applies. Your original world continues on without you, unharmed and unreachable, like a dream you can remember but never return to. The more you sit with these possibilities, the more the weapon in your hand begins to feel like something different. Less a tool, more a probe pushing at the edges of what reality is willing to permit. Each scenario is not just about a single life. It is about whether the universe will allow you to tear a hole in its own logic, or whether it will bend, split, or refuse you entirely instead. If you follow the grandfather paradox all the way to its end, you find that it does not settle down into comfortable mystery. It ends in bare contradiction. You travel back into the past. You stop the event that must occur for you to exist. If you succeed, you erase the traveler who took the journey. The action cancels itself as soon as it is completed. It is like writing a story in which the author erases their own birth halfway through the book. The words that have already been written should not be there, and yet they are. This is the nightmare version of cause and effect, the place where they do not simply blur, or loop, but threaten to destroy each other. Unlike the gentle, closed curves where events feed into themselves without contradiction, this one does not quietly fold. It tears. Physicists often say that nature abhors such contradictions. Logic rejects them, and yet the idea hangs there, persistent, because our equations hint that motion backward in time might not be strictly forbidden in all situations. Time, in its elegance, might permit paths that return to earlier moments. What it does not seem to permit is a story that makes itself impossible. That is why many scientists, when they dare to think about these things, invoke something like a narrative repair mechanism built into reality. One version is called the principle of self-consistency. Another, in a broader context, is given the name cosmic censorship. The phrases are different, but the feeling underneath is the same. Events may twist and wrap, they may circle back, but they cannot be arranged in a way that breaks their own coherence. In that view, you can travel to the past, but you cannot do anything that would make your journey impossible. You are not forbidden to meet your grandfather. In fact, perhaps you always did. You may sit with him on a bench, share a conversation, even influence small details of his day. You might raise your hand with a terrible intention, but something as simple as a misstep, a jammed trigger, or a pang of conscience ensures that the contradiction never fully forms. It does not have to be dramatic. It only has to be enough. You are not the author of a new past. You are part of the past that was always there. Time travel in this picture becomes less like absolute control and more like choreography. You can move, but you are dancing within lines that were quietly drawn long before you understood the pattern. Every step you take falls exactly where it must so that, in the end, the timeline remains whole. There is a comfort in that, and a cost. If paradoxes simply cannot occur, then free will begins to look thin. Like paper held up to the light, your choices may feel open from the inside, but only those that fit into some unbroken loop are ever truly possible. You do not have to worry about destroying time, because on some deep level time already contains, and has always contained, the choices you will make. The script will not let you stray far enough to break it, and still, the contradiction lingers at the edge of thought. What if there is no gentle repair? No hidden hand of consistency steering you away from disaster? What if someone, somewhere, someday pushes exactly the wrong way, and there is no subtle coincidence to soften the blow? An action is taken that logic cannot wrap itself around. A true paradox takes shape. Then what? Does time shatter like glass under a sudden strike? Fragments of timelines scattering into branches we cannot count. Does a new world grow out of the rupture, leaving the old one sealed off behind it like a closed bud? Or does everything simply fail to happen at all? The impossible story refusing to start. The universe quietly declining to host a sequence of events that could not be told without breaking itself. These are questions that do not yield easy sleep, yet they live naturally in the shadow of our best theories. Somewhere inside the loops and folds, the self-consistent curves, and the branching paths, there may be a deeper pattern we have not yet seen. A rule that explains why. In day-to-day life, time feels so steady, so resistant to being disturbed. It could be that the past feels like bedrock, not because it is invulnerable, but because, up to this moment, nothing has ever managed to crack it. Perhaps the story seems stable simply because, so far, we have never found a way to break it. There is a quiet idea hiding behind almost every paradox we touch. It is the notion that the universe has standards, that it will not calmly allow just any story to exist. Somewhere beneath all the noise and chaos, it is as if there were an editor moving invisibly between events, crossing out impossible lines before they can spread. In that picture, time is not just a straight recording of whatever happens. It is more like a manuscript writing itself, adjusting and tightening as it goes. The rules that shape that manuscript are not only about how gravity bends or how light moves. They also seem to care about whether a story holds together when something threatens to rip the narrative apart. A contradiction, a paradox, a grandfather dying too soon for you ever to be born. The timeline does not simply break. It quietly leans away from the tier and rewrites itself, not with magic, but with constraint. In physics, this thought appears in a very particular form, often called the Novikov self-consistency principle. It says, very gently but firmly, that any event that occurs in a time loop must be consistent with itself. Time may allow loops, but never outright contradictions. You can, at least in the mathematics, travel into the past. You can meet people, move objects, speak words, but whatever you do, you cannot create an outcome that clashes with the history that led you there. You do not get to change the ending. You can only help to fulfill it. That does not mean you are frozen. You still feel yourself choosing, hesitating, acting. It is just that your freedom is already woven into the past you think you are trying to alter. From the inside, it feels like improvising. From the outside, it looks like a character in a play, walking the same lines every time. Convinced, each gesture is new. There is something eerie in that. A sense that the past is not merely hard to change, it is immune. If you try to push against it, strange little obstacles appear. The gun jams, or your aim is off, or you are delayed long enough that the crucial moment slides past. Perhaps someone bumps into you at just the right second, spilling coffee on your coat so that you never make it to the station where history hangs in the balance. None of it requires miracles. It is simply that the paths that would lead to a real paradox are absent from the finished book. Logic has already crossed them out. But there is another way to think about how the universe might defend itself from contradiction. And this one does not patch the story. It quarantines it. In some models, when you do something that would break the consistency of your own past, the timeline does not bend around you to keep itself whole. It splits. The impossible thread is not corrected. It is given its own separate space to run. In that picture, your drastic act does not rewrite the world you came from. It grows a new one beside it. The original history remains intact, untouched by your interference. But you are no longer there. You have stepped into a parallel flow of events, a side stream that begins at the moment of contradiction. You find yourself living in a version of reality that was never meant to unfold in your original story. And the door back has quietly locked behind you. Either way, whether time curves to absorb your choices or fractures to contain them, something soft but precious seems to be lost. The dream of absolute freedom, the fantasy that we can walk backward into our own history and rearrange it as we please, begins to fade. The past starts to feel less like a path you can wander at will and more like a closed room with walls you can touch but not move. As these ideas deepen, time itself starts to feel oddly alive, not just flowing but selecting, sifting through possibilities and keeping only the ones that fit. It is a short, disorienting step from there to an even stranger vision, one where the universe does not merely avoid paradox by bending or branching occasionally, but by splitting constantly, all the time, at every scale. You can imagine taking a step out of bed one morning, a movement so ordinary you barely register it. You hesitate for a heartbeat, then place your foot on the floor. In one version of events, you stand up. In another, you lie back down. In yet another, you turn to speak to someone in the doorway. Each small difference is trivial from your own perspective. But what if, deep underneath, each of these possibilities is real somewhere, not as a poetic flourish, but as an actual structure of the universe? This is the spirit of what is often called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. It does not merely allow alternate realities, it insists on them. At the smallest scales we can probe, particles behave less like tiny marbles and more like clouds of possibility. A single photon does not politely choose left or right as it moves through an experiment. Until it is measured, the mathematics treats it as if it has gone both ways at once. A particle is not tied to a single position. It is described as spread out over many potential outcomes. And yet, when you finally look, you see only one result, one path, one dot on a screen. The question that lingers is simple and piercing. What happened to all the other possibilities? Did they simply vanish, as if they had never been real? The many worlds view answers quietly but radically. No, every outcome happens. Every path is taken. Every possible version of the event is realized in a different branch of reality. You only ever experience one of them, but the others continue without you. If that is true, then whatever applies to particles must also, in some delicate way, apply to you. Your life stops being a single straight thread and begins to resemble a vast tree, endlessly branching. Every choice you face, however small, sends the world fanning out into new directions. Each word you say or swallow, each train you catch or miss, each person you meet or walk past, all of them trace separate lines somewhere. There is a version of you who turned left instead of right, stayed instead of leaving, spoke instead of remaining silent. It is a haunting kind of freedom. Your regrets are real somewhere, carried by another self who lives with their consequences. So are your triumphs. unfolding in branches where you found the courage you lacked here. So are the lives that almost happened but did not. The careers you never pursued. The loves you never found. The versions of you that did not quite come into focus in this line of time. In this view, even the fantasy of going back to fix a mistake takes on a new meaning. You are not erasing what happened. You are stepping into a different branch where events take another turn. The past you remember remains untouched behind you in some neighboring world. You do not override it. You simply move away from it, following a new thread into an unfamiliar future. The old line continues without you, just as solid and just as real as the one you now walk. This picture neatly dissolves the grandfather paradox. You can travel back along some path and harm your ancestor, but the self who did that came from a branch where the ancestor lived long enough to have children, and eventually, your action creates a new reality in which you will never be born. But it does not reach backward to erase the traveler who stepped into the machine. The apparent contradiction melts into a kind of detour. Both worlds exist, side by side, each internally consistent. But the cost of this neatness is heavy. If every significant outcome of your actions spins off into its own universe, then every choice you make has consequences not just here, but everywhere. Each decision is an opening, an invitation for reality to split again. And if that has been happening all along, then you have already scattered innumerable versions of yourself across a library of worlds built from moments you barely remember. A missed phone call, a changed route home, a question you almost asked and did not. When you let that sink in, your sense of self starts to shift. You feel less like a single person walking along a well-defined road and more like one viewpoint among many. One story being read in a library full of nearly identical books. Somewhere, right now, another you may be sitting in a slightly different room, wondering whether they made the better choice, peering back along their own branch with the same mixture of tenderness and doubt. Every so often, people wake with a faint feeling that something is off. The room looks the same. The calendar has not changed. Their memories line up in the right order. And yet, a decision from long ago, or perhaps from only yesterday, feels as if it went differently than it did. A small, eerie dislocation, as if two versions of the same life brushed past each other in the dark. Most of the time, we shrug this off. It is just a mood, just a trick of memory. But in the light of many worlds, that sensation can take on another flavor, like the echo of a nearby reality where you chose differently and are now living with a different story. In that picture, you are not a single unbroken thread of consciousness. You are one node in an enormous, branching structure, one observer among countless versions of yourself, each riding a separate limb of the quantum tree. And the strange, humbling thing is that the you who sits here, listening to these thoughts, is not more authentic than the others. Once the universe splits, all branches are, in principle, equally real. No particular timeline owns the title of true. The only reason this one feels central is that it is the one you remember. Memory gives it weight, like a bookmark left between its pages. But even memory, in some speculative ideas, may not be completely fixed. There are whispers that awareness itself might be able to drift subtly, aligning with different branches as reality forks, while still preserving the illusion of a smooth, continuous life. We do not yet know whether that is so. For now, the mind seems more like a song played on a single instrument, even if the underlying physics hints at harmonics we never quite hear. Quantum computers already lean into this strange territory, performing calculations by allowing systems to explore many possibilities at once, and then carefully interfering those possibilities to extract useful answers. It is not magic. It is simply what happens when you accept that, at the smallest scales, reality is less a set of fixed points and more a shimmering web of maybes. And in the quiet moments, when a sense of familiarity washes over you for no clear reason, or when a dream feels less like invention and more like a memory from a life you do not recall living, it can be tempting to wonder whether you are brushing up against the edges of nearby branches. Perhaps most of the time those other lives remain entirely sealed off. Perhaps sometimes your thoughts drift close enough to feel their warmth without ever fully touching. Whatever the truth may be, the idea leaves a lingering feeling, like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder in the dark, the sense that you are both smaller and larger than you imagined. Just one version of a person spread delicately across possibilities, listening, wondering, trying to make peace with a universe that may be endlessly branching while you cradle a single, fragile line of memory and call it your own. A moment ago, we were tracing branches, feeling how every choice might be less like picking a road and more like becoming one. That feeling deepens when you move from people and paths to something much smaller and stranger. Imagine a box, simple and unremarkable from the outside, and imagine sealing it carefully. Inside, you place a cat, warm and quiet, a tiny lump of radioactive material, a fragile glass vial of poison, and a delicate trigger mechanism linking them together. The rule is simple. If the atom decays, the mechanism shatters the vial, the poison is released, and the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, the vial stays whole, and the cat lives. You close the lid. You do not listen for sounds. You do not peek. You just wait. Now comes the question that will not leave physicists alone. Before you open the box, is the cat alive or dead? Common sense leans in and insists it must be one or the other. Either the atom decayed or it did not. Either the vial broke or it did not. Either the cat is breathing or it is still. There is comfort in that kind of clarity. Quantum mechanics gently refuses that comfort. In this setup, at least in the simplest picture, the atom is described as being in a superposition, not decayed, not undecayed, but in a kind of both at once. Like a possibility cloud spread across outcomes, because the trigger watches that atom, and the cat's fate is tied to the trigger. The cat becomes entangled with the atom. The two of them share a single, strange state. In that entangled state, as long as the box remains closed and no information leaks out, the cat is pulled into the same limbo, It is not just that you do not know whether it is alive or dead. In the quantum description, before observation, the whole system is written as if both possibilities coexist: cat alive and cat dead, overlapping, neither fully chosen, two paths lying quietly on top of each other, waiting. This is the heart of one of the most famous thought experiments in physics, not because of its cruelty, but because of the way it exposes something deeply unsettling. It suggests that observation does not simply show you what was already there. It may help decide what counts as real before you lift the lid. The cat is described as a quantum blur of both outcomes, two stories woven into one. The moment you look, one story steps forward and becomes the reality you experience. The other slips away from your reach. Where does that shadow story go? In some gentle, more classical ways of thinking, you might say it was never more than a calculation tool, a way of keeping track of possibilities that were always destined to end in a single outcome. In the many worlds view that we brushed against earlier, something more radical is suggested. The idea there is that when you open the box, the universe itself divides. In one branch, you see a living, startled cat, perhaps stretching and blinking at the sudden light. In another, you find a silent body. Both outcomes remain, not just as ideas, but as structures, each with its own version of you. Somewhere in that tapestry of branches, there is a you who feels a rush of relief as the cat scrambles out of the box. Somewhere else, there is a you who sits very still for a long time, staring at a motionless form. You, the observer, become the dividing line where the paths separate. The experiment is no longer just about what happens inside the box. It is also about what happens inside you. It is not only the cat that lives in these suspended moments. Think about every instant in your own life when the future seemed to hang in the balance. A medical result waiting in a sealed envelope. A phone call that might bring good news or bad. A message you sent that could be read with joy or with anger. For a while, there are at least two futures you can imagine, and you move through your day as if both are possible. Then you answer the call, open the letter, refresh the screen. One outcome crosses the line into your reality. The others, if many worlds is right, continue somewhere else, forever out of reach. When you sit with that, you may find that every unopened box in your life feels a little heavier, not because cardboard and tape have grown thicker, but because they seem to hide not just one unknown outcome, but an entire tangle of possible worlds, each waiting, in some sense, for your awareness to slide toward one and away from the others. In quantum theory, these are not just poetic moments of waiting. They are periods of genuine suspension, where the mathematical description of the system does not assign a single, sharp outcome. Possibilities overlap. Paths intertwine. Only when a measurement is made does the description collapse into one definite state. That word, collapse, is a quiet lightning bolt. It marks the point where a soft blur of maybes becomes a single, hard is. What causes that collapse is a question that has troubled physicists for generations. In many practical situations, it is enough to say that any interaction with the environment, any record being made, counts as an observation. A detector clicks, a screen flashes, a pointer moves. But there is a more unsettling possibility peeking out from under the formalism, one that some people prefer not to look at directly. What if the thing that finally anchors reality is not just a device, but awareness itself? Not your eyes in particular, not the metal of the instrument, but consciousness. It is one of the most disturbing ideas resting quietly beneath the equations, that the observer is not just a passive witness, but an active ingredient. You are not simply watching the universe unfold on its own. You are helping to choose which version of the universe becomes your experience. The technical name for the puzzle is the measurement problem, but giving it a name does not make it gentler. The equations of quantum mechanics, taken at face value, say something very specific. Before measurement, particles are not located clearly in one place or another. They are described by overlapping possibilities. Only when something counts as a measurement does the system snap into a single, classical result. It is as if reality holds its breath around the edges of your awareness, waiting for a decision. This leads to a question that many physicists carry like a quiet stone in their pocket, rarely pulling it out in bright rooms. What exactly is observation? Is it just the registration of data on a device, whether anyone ever reads it? Is it any interaction that leaves a lasting trace? Or does the presence of a conscious mind matter in some fundamental way? If that last possibility is even partly true, then suddenly, you, the one wondering about all this in the middle of the night, are not a side character in the story of the universe. You are part of the mechanism that shapes which line the story follows. In that picture, whenever you watch a result appear, whenever you notice a number on a screen or see a coin land heads up on a table, you are doing more than collecting information. You are participating in the collapse of a cloud of possibilities into one particular world. The other options become, at best, faint echoes you will never hear. They might still exist in other branches, but for you, they are gone. That thought can make your inner life feel different. Each choice, each act of attention, begins to look less like a simple selection from a fixed menu and more like a carving motion, tracing one line through a space filled with many. Perhaps you are not creating reality from nothing. Perhaps you are choosing a path that has always been written into the structure of things, letting one possibility rise out of the blur while the rest fade back into silence. Either way, the effect is the same. Your thoughts start to feel like instruments, tuned finely enough to pick out a single note from a chord the universe is always playing. Your questions, your curiosities, your moments of decision become tools, not just of observation, but of participation. The very act of wondering which outcome will happen seems to lay down a track for one of them to arrive on. If you return in your mind to that box for a moment, to the cat breathing or not breathing in the dark, it is tempting to see the whole setup differently, less as a cruel puzzle and more as a mirror, reflecting something back at you about how reality and awareness may be tangled in that silence before the lid is lifted. There is more than a physical system waiting for a measurement. There is a question waiting for a mind. When you finally open the box, whatever you see has been selected from a delicate spread of possibilities. The story you then carry forward, the memory you keep, is one thin path through a much thicker forest somewhere in the mathematics. The other paths remain, somewhere in the space of all that could have been. Other versions of that moment breathe and end differently. But for you, for this line of experience, there is only one outcome, settled and unchangeable. And perhaps, if any part of this picture is close to the truth, the cat was never only waiting on the atom, or the mechanism, or the poison. It was waiting on the quiet, invisible arrival of you. Not on science as a set of rules, not on fate as a distant script, just on the simple, profound act of a conscious mind lifting a lid, seeing, and by seeing, allowing one world among many to become the one that is real. When you sit with the idea that your noticing helps choose a single world out of many, another strange question begins to glow at the edges. What happens when there is more than one thing to notice? Not just a lonely particle or a single undecided event, but a pair, born together and then torn apart. Imagine creating two tiny particles in the same place, at the same moment, under the same conditions, like twins sharing a first breath. Then you let them drift away from each other. One is sent to the left, the other to the right. Time passes, distances grow, whole star systems, whole spiral arms of a galaxy could slide between them. They are so far apart that even light, racing as fast as anything can, would take years to travel from one to the other. And yet, something almost impolite happens. You pick up one of the particles and perform a measurement on it. You ask it a simple question about one of its properties. As soon as you do, the state of the other particle is fixed as well. The response is not just quick, it is effectively instantaneous. There is no time for a signal to make the journey, no chance for a message to whisper across the darkness, warning the second about what you did to the first. This puzzling connection is what we call entanglement, and it may be the strangest gift quantum mechanics has handed us. Once two particles are entangled, they behave less like two separate objects and more like one single system whose pieces happen to be far apart. Their properties are not merely correlated, like matching socks pulled from a drawer. They are deeply connected. When you measure one, you do not change the other from a distance in the ordinary sense. Instead, you reveal a pattern that was always shared between them. Albert Einstein disliked this deeply. He famously called it spooky action at a distance, because it seemed to defy his sense that nothing, not even information, should move faster than light. He suspected there must be something hidden in the particles, some secret instructions written at the moment of their birth, telling them how to behave once measured. Then, when you check them later, they would simply be following those hidden rules. No faster than light influence required. For a while, that hope lingered. Then came the work that led to what we now call Bell's theorem, and the delicate experiments that followed it. Those tests, repeated and refined over many years, squeezed the space for hidden instructions smaller and smaller until it was effectively gone. The results did not match a universe built from local, secret codes. The patterns of entangled particles seemed to insist on something genuinely non-local, something that does not fit comfortably inside our usual picture of separated things. Entangled particles behave as if distance has lost some of its authority. It is not that signals race between them faster than light. It is more like the information describing them was never fully split to begin with. They were one story, written across two locations. When you turn a page in one place, the page has already turned in the other. If you let that image expand, the discomfort grows a little. If the tiniest building blocks can remain linked across vast distances, what about larger systems? What about clusters of particles, living cells, whole brains? Every time two things interact, they are, in a sense, written into the same line of physics: touch, conversation, shared creation. All of these are moments when separate stories overlap and then diverge again. Some physicists and philosophers have quietly wondered whether every such encounter leaves behind a kind of thin, invisible entanglement. Subtle, but real. If entanglement is more rule than exception, then space itself begins to feel different. Less like a thick wall that keeps things apart. More like a stretched surface connecting points that once touched. The sense of being utterly alone in your skin softens, just a little, into the sense of being part of a web woven from countless shared moments. A web older than light and wider than your imagination can hold. From there, it is a small, trembling step to another kind of connection. The way information is supposed to be tied to matter and energy. Imagine for a moment something very ordinary. You throw a book into a fire. The pages blacken and curl. Smoke rises and drifts away. Eventually, there is nothing left that looks like words, nothing that looks like meaning. And yet, according to the way physics usually works, the information is not truly gone. In principle, if you could track every molecule of ash and air, if you could rewind every particle of heat and light, you could reconstruct what had been there. Energy changes form, so does structure, but the underlying information is preserved. The universe keeps its own record. Now, picture something far less ordinary: a black hole, a region of space where gravity has become so intense that there is a boundary, an event horizon, beyond which nothing can escape. You drop something in. It could be a book, a spacecraft, a whole planet. From the outside, you never see those things cross the horizon. You only see the black hole grow slightly more massive, slightly more distorted. Whatever falls in leaves no returning signal, no echo you can capture. Here is the disturbing part. In the classical picture of black holes, the detailed information about what you dropped in does not just hide, it is destroyed. The particular arrangement of particles, the story written in their structure, is crushed into featureless simplicity behind the horizon. From the outside, All that survives is a few numbers: how heavy the black hole is, how fast it might spin, whether it carries any electric charge. The rest, it seems, is gone without a trace. This collides head-on with the principle that quantum theory leans on most heavily: the idea that information cannot simply vanish. At the deepest level, that belief, called unitarity, is one of the bedrocks of modern physics. It says that if you knew everything about a system at one moment, you could, in theory, work out everything about it at any other moment. The cosmic book might be messy and dense, but no pages are ever truly removed. Black holes, under straightforward general relativity, appear to ignore that rule. They swallow matter and its arrangement, then sit there as if the details never mattered. The conflict this creates is known as the black hole information paradox. For decades, it has been less a tidy puzzle and more a quiet wound in our understanding. Because it is not just about how stars die. It reaches into what it means for anything to be knowable. Some argued that the information really is lost, that there are places in the universe where knowledge goes not just beyond our reach, but beyond existence. Others pushed back, insisting that somehow, in some as yet unclear way, the information must leak back out. Perhaps it is encoded in the faint trickle of particles that black holes are predicted to emit as they slowly evaporate, a process we call Hawking radiation. Perhaps the horizon itself holds a kind of holographic record on its surface, an imprint of everything that has crossed it, but no one has held the answer in their hands. And so the question deepens. If there are regions where information can be destroyed, then so can meaning, so can memory, so can you. A black hole would not just be an object. It would be a boundary where the universe stops being able to keep its own story straight. Hawking radiation, if it exists the way we think, only sharpens the unease over immense stretches of time. A black hole is expected to radiate away its mass, little by little, like an ember glowing faintly as it cools. No dramatic explosion, no final cry, just gradual thinning until, at last, there is nothing left but a slight shiver in space-time and then silence. If all the information about what fell in has been erased, then, when the black hole finishes evaporating, the universe has lost something it can never recover. A page of its history has been torn out and burned, not only to ash, but to emptiness. It is no longer just a matter of heavy stars and curved geometry. It cuts into the foundation of unitarity, into the expectation that the cosmic ledger always balances, that every past configuration leaves some kind of trace. Some theories try to soothe this. Perhaps every bit of information that goes in is smeared delicately across the horizon, stored like a hologram in microscopic degrees of freedom. Perhaps as the black hole radiates, that information is slowly woven into the outgoing light in patterns too subtle and tangled for us to read. But they're all the same. Perhaps nothing is truly lost, only scrambled beyond our practical reach. We do not yet know which of these stories, if any, will prove to be closest to the truth. It may be that we never get to stand close enough to a black hole to test our ideas in the way we test circuits and crystals in labs. At that edge, science brushes against something darker, the possibility that reality itself may not remember everything that happens within it. If there are places where information can fall and leave no echo, then there may be stories that end in a silence so complete that not even the universe can tell they were ever written. Whole galaxies, countless lives, entire civilizations could, in principle, pass that horizon and vanish, not only from sight, but from the record. The question that rises out of this, softly but insistently, is no longer just about survival. It is about legacy. What does it mean to leave something behind if even the cosmos itself might, in the farthest future, forget? What becomes of all our patterns and memories if there are corners of existence where meaning can drip away and be gone? The black hole information paradox has always been a technical problem for theorists, but underneath the equations, it carries a more human weight. It forces us to look at the scale of what could be lost and at the fragile wonder of being here at all. In a universe where some paradoxes do not simply puzzle us, they grieve us because they hint at stories that might end without any witness, any trace, or any way back. When you think about information slipping away at the edge of a black hole, it is hard not to follow that thought all the way out to a quieter, more human fear. Maybe the universe will not end in fire or in ice, but in forgetting. Somewhere along the way, we began to trust the idea that anything could be known if we were patient enough, that no matter how strange or wide the cosmos turned out to be, its secrets would eventually unfold under the slow pressure of curiosity. With enough time, enough instruments, enough equations, we told ourselves everything would become clear. But what if that belief is only another comforting story? What if there are regions of reality that are not merely difficult for us to reach, but fundamentally beyond what any mind like ours can grasp? Not because they are being hidden, but because knowing them in the way we usually mean by knowing may simply not be possible. The paradoxes we have wandered through, the loops in time, the puzzles of superposition and collapse, the hints of vanishing information, all seem to point toward one blunt truth. Our minds were shaped by survival, not by infinity. We evolved to recognize faces in half a heartbeat, to track the rustle of leaves and the arc of thrown stones, to read weather in the color of clouds and mood in the tilt of a shoulder. We did not grow up in spaces with 12 dimensions, did not have to intuit a universe where one event quietly creates two timelines, or where causes and effects lean toward each other from opposite directions in time. So we reach anyway. We write models, build simulations, craft metaphors. We project shadows of understanding onto the cave wall of our perception, knowing that whatever is casting them stands somewhere behind us. Out of sight, reality waits behind the curtain of what our senses and thoughts can hold. And every time we pull the fabric back even a little, the light that spills through stings our eyes. It is tempting, in the face of these contradictions and loops and disappearing certainties, to suspect that the universe is not broken at all. It might be our logic that is limited, our intuitions that are strained past their design. we keep trying to press a narrative built for beginnings, middles, and ends onto something that may be recursing, branching, folding in ways that do not fit those shapes. There is something quietly unsettling in that. It is not simply that we do not know yet. It is the possibility that we may never be able to know. Not fully. That our questions are brushing up against a wall made not of unmeasured data, but of our own architecture. Reality may be too large, too self-referential, too alien for nervous systems tuned to campfires and seasons to ever feel entirely at home in it. And yet, even knowing that, we keep asking. Perhaps that is one of the most tender things about us. Not our intelligence or our memory, but our willingness to stand in front of a problem that will not resolve and stay there, awake, listening to the silence it throws back. If your thoughts feel a little tired at the edges and yet oddly sharpened, as if they have just pressed against something too big to fit inside your skull, you are not alone. All of this circling, all of this straining, leads back to another possibility that is almost more frightening than being late to a crowded party. What if we are not late at all? What if we are early? We often picture ourselves as the newcomers, wandering into a galaxy that should already be thick with the ruins and signals of civilizations older and wiser than ours. In that story, the silence is suspicious, a mystery for detectives with telescopes to solve. But try on a different story, just for a while. In this one, there simply has not been anyone else yet. Not because they are hiding, not because some disaster wiped them away, but because the universe is only now reaching the moment where beings like us can exist. In that version, we are not just curious, we are profoundly alone in a chronological sense. Ours might be the first flicker of self-awareness to rise from dust in this corner of existence. The first time the cosmos, through a fragile animal brain, has turned inward and whispered, "What am I?" That thought tilts the floor beneath your feet. We are no longer just explorers mapping a landscape others already crossed. We are origin points. Picture yourself as the first voice rising in an enormous empty hall. The first echo in a cathedral that has waited ages in patient silence. The first pattern of thought, complex enough to step outside itself and ask about its own shape. The first hands to build machines that can simulate, dream, and extend perception past the horizon of the senses. That position carries a weight that is almost hard to breathe under. If we are among the first, then what we do matters more than we can smoothly feel. Our experiments, our choices, our kindness and cruelty, all become a kind of draft version of what intelligence can be. Our survival or our failure becomes either the prologue to all future awareness, or the final chapter of something that never had a chance to write more than a few pages. In that light, the silence between the stars stops feeling like a warning and starts feeling like something sacred. Not an accusation, but an invitation. A vast, untouched space waiting for its first story to be told across it. The question, then, begins to turn inward. What kind of story are we going to be? A species that builds and builds until it forgets why it began, or one that learns, adapts, reaches out and speaks softly with an understanding of its own vulnerability. If you have ever looked up at the night sky and felt small, and now, thinking this way, feel suddenly enormous in a way that borders on terrifying, you are brushing against that responsibility. We may be standing at the beginning of something that has never happened before, and the first mind to awaken in the quiet has an outsized influence on everything that comes after. All of this, the equations and paradoxes, the talk of horizons and entanglement, finally circles back to something very close and personal, to you, sitting wherever you are, listening with a soft, temporary body that knows, at some level, that it will not be here forever. Beneath every theory, every instrument aimed at the sky, every complicated machine, there is a simple undercurrent, a mind trying not to be erased. We do not speak of it often, but our hunger for knowledge, our obsession with time, our need to leave Mark's books, songs, data, children hems toward the same center. As far as we can tell, we are the only creatures on this planet who fully understand that we are going to end, and there is a part of us that does not accept that quietly. So we imagine branching timelines where another version of us keeps walking. We dream of uploading consciousness into circuits. We ask whether whatever we mean by a soul might travel along the curves of space-time. We wonder whether intelligence, once kindled, can ever truly go completely dark. Physics does not give easy comfort here, but it does leave little cracks where light gets in. The same framework that suggests particles can remain entangled across the galaxy, that time might loop, that information might hover on the edge of vanishing, also leaves room, just barely, for something beyond a stark, abrupt ending, perhaps death. For consciousness is less like a book slamming shut and more like a measurement in a strange experiment, a change in state. Some scientists and philosophers have played with the idea that what we call mind is a pattern, a structure that, if copied closely enough, might persist in another medium. Others imagine minds running as software in simulations, a kind of digital afterlife where memories and personality continue as long as there is energy and hardware to sustain them, a dream that does not end because it is no longer entirely tied to a particular arrangement of cells. Then there are quieter, more speculative suggestions that shift the angle slightly. They say, maybe this is already the afterlife. Maybe the very fact that you find yourself conscious now, at this moment, means that you will always find yourself conscious somewhere. Someone, not necessarily in this body, not necessarily with these memories, but in a body, in a story, flickering awake again and again. It is not proof. It is not a guarantee. It may not even be the kind of comfort the heart instinctively looks for, but it is not nothing either, because while physics has closed many doors, it has not yet slammed this one shut. The mysteries we have brushed tonight have not gone anywhere. They remain, patient and unresolved, at the edge where understanding gives way to something more quiet and vast. And in that space, there is room to wonder, even as we accept our limits, whether awareness might be more deeply woven into the fabric of reality than we currently know. and whether the story of being conscious is, in some sense, larger than any single life can hold. If any of these ideas has made you feel the weight of your own breathing a little more clearly, the soft rise and fall of your chest suddenly precious, it is because for a moment you are aware of how brief and bright it is to be here at all. Science may never hand us eternity. What it does give us is a way to ask, gently but honestly, whether forever was ever ours to begin with, or whether the wish to live without ending is really a wish to finally understand what life is while we still have it. Out beyond every personal story, beyond every city and planet and star, the universe is stretching. With each quiet heartbeat of cosmic time, galaxies drift a tiny bit farther from one another. Space itself lengthens, like fabric being drawn taut. As it does, the familiar night sky slowly thins. Distances grow. Light has farther to travel. The stars, one by one, exhaust the fuel that lets them burn. It will not happen tomorrow, or in 1,000 lifetimes, or in all the histories you and I can easily imagine, but somewhere far ahead, on scales so large they barely feel like time at all. The last brilliant stars will fade. New stars will no longer be born. The great engines of fusion will go dark. Black holes will continue their slow work for longer still, swallowing wandering matter, grinding it into deeper simplicity. And then, according to some pictures, even they will begin to evaporate, leaking away their mass as a faint, cold whisper of radiation until they, too, are gone. What remains in that far future is not noise but stillness. No warmth flowing from hotter places to cooler ones. No currents, no chemistry, no minds, just a thin, cold spread of particles and stretched out light, drifting in a universe that has used up its ability to change in any useful way. Physicists sometimes call this the heat death of the universe, though it is really a kind of final equilibrium, a quiet victory for entropy, where every pattern has unraveled into its simplest threads. If that is where everything is heading, it asks a question that feels less like an equation and more like a sigh. If it all ends in almost nothing, why did anything begin? Why rise out of that stillness only to dissolve back into it? Why spend those long arcs of cosmic time building stars, weaving molecules, sculpting living beings and conscious minds, if the final page is blank? Some people answer that the universe does not need a reason. It is not a story being told for an audience. It simply is. And the patterns we see in it are not intentions, just outcomes. Others wonder, half seriously and half in hope, whether that final stillness might not be an ending at all, but part of a larger rhythm. Perhaps what we call entropy is not death, but reset, the coiling of a spring before another release, a deep inhalation before another kind of big bang. Or perhaps there is only this round, a single flowering of structure in an immense field of possible realities that never bloom. In all of those pictures, one echo remains the same, the sense that the impulse to find meaning is coming from us, not from the sky. The universe does not lean down to explain itself. We are the ones projecting questions outward like lantern light. When we imagine the end, we hear our own need reflected back. The echo we think we hear from the edge of time might simply be our own voices, whispering that we want this to matter. Sometimes, standing under a clear night, the stars do not feel cold or cruel. They feel indifferent, like eyes that are not eyes at all, like a vast, silent audience that never asked for a performance. You look up, and it is as if the universe is saying, in its own quiet way, you are temporary, and still, you listen. You care anyway. You keep asking. All the paradoxes and puzzles we have wandered through, black holes that might erase stories, time loops that fold beginnings into endings, branching universes that hold every possible version of you. Cats in boxes that are both alive and dead until you look, eventually turn back towards something much closer than any distant galaxy. They turn toward the person who is listening, because beneath every theory, every image from a telescope, every careful experiment, there is always a mind leaning forward, trying to outrun something it can feel but not escape. We rarely say it aloud, but much of our restlessness points the same way. We are the animals who know we will end, and we cannot quite accept that without a struggle. So we reach backward into history and forward into imagined futures. We build machines that extend our senses. We write, record, draw, code. We try again and again to leave a trace. We ask whether our awareness could be stored somewhere else, in circuits instead of cells. We wonder if our thoughts are patterns that could, in principle, be copied and preserved. We imagine running minds as simulations, dreaming without bodies, in landscapes made of numbers. We tell stories about souls stepping from one body to another, or about some deeper layer of reality where consciousness is less fragile than it appears here. Physics, as it stands now, neither promises nor forbids any of this outright. It hints, suggests, leaves doors half open in the form of unresolved questions, the same framework that allows for entangled particles and uncertain paths also refuses to say, with absolute finality, that awareness must vanish without remainder. There is room for cautious hope, room for quiet acceptance, and room for honest not knowing. But even if every such dream turned out to be only that, a dream, the most astonishing fact would remain untouched, that you are here at all, that in a universe which may one day cool into almost perfect silence, there is, for now, a small window of warmth and structure in which beings made of stardust can sit and ask what it all means. You are, right now, one of those beings, a soft, finite body woven from atoms that were forged in stars that died long before Earth was even a thought in the cosmos. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe were all shaped in ancient furnaces and scattered across space before gathering again into you. Your mind speaks a language that once was only gestures and sounds around a fire. Your memories are threads stitched through a brain that does not know you exist and yet somehow gives rise to your sense of self. You are built from pieces that do not care about you, from particles and fields that follow rules without intention, blind molecules, mindless energy, forces that do not know words like hope or fear or love. And yet, from that unthinking fabric, something has appeared that can fall in love, that can laugh, that can grieve, something that can look at its own hands and ask, honestly and without clear answer, what am I existing? No matter how many dimensions we add to our equations, no matter how many timelines we sketch or models we refine, the strangest thing in the story continues to be the one asking the questions. Are you simply a complicated signal riding along a network of nerves, a brief pattern of organized matter that will scatter, leaving no more trace than a wave after it hits the shore? A fortunate glitch in biology. Interesting, but not special. Or are you, in some quiet way, the universe's answer to its own long silence? A tiny region where matter has learned how to listen to itself. Every attempt to pin that down wraps back around. Each answer we try to give about consciousness folds into more questions. The path of explanation bends into loops. Every truth we reach for about who and what we are eventually becomes a mirror, handing us our own face instead of a clean solution. You are not standing outside the mystery, looking in. You are inside it, made of it, looking out. Perhaps that is what all of this has really been circling. Not a quest to neatly solve the paradoxes, but a slow realization that you are one, a finite being who can imagine eternity, a self that can picture its own disappearance, a temporary configuration of atoms that can care deeply about things that will outlast it and things that will not. A voice asking questions into a universe that may never compose an answer in words you recognize, and still you ask. If that thought leaves you very still, not panicked, not entirely comforted, but washed in a kind of quiet wonder, then something important has happened. Not out there, in distant galaxies or theoretical spaces, but here, in you. Because the last and perhaps most intimate paradox is not hidden in black holes or quantum experiments. It is sitting in your chair, breathing, thinking, listening to this. The impossibility of you is not that you exist in spite of the universe, but that you exist as a part of it, able to reflect on itself, that in a cosmos which may someday pass into cold stillness, there is a brief interval where matter wakes up and notices. This is that interval. You are one of the places where it notices, and maybe, when all the equations are written and all the telescopes are quiet, that is where the story comes to rest for now, not in a final answer, but in the simple, profound fact that you are here at all, aware of being here for a little while. Whether that is the end of the story or a beginning, the universe is only just learning how to tell. No one can say. What you can do in this small, shining moment is feel it.